tens of thousands of soldiers and heavy weaponry, the Russian buildup on the border to Ukraine looks more like preparations for invasion than the standard military exercise that Russia claims it's conducting. It is the most massive show of force since Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. Since then, Russia's been deploying mercenaries, volunteers, and local collaborators to wage hybrid warfare in eastern Ukraine. Now, Kiev, along with Europe and the US, fear a dramatic escalation in violence. NATO and Europe are urging Russia to stand down. We ask, Russia-Ukraine crisis, what does Putin want? Hello and welcome to The Point. It's a pleasure to welcome our guests. Gesine Dornblüth is a freelance journalist who has reported extensively on and from Russia for German public broadcasters. She says, we have seen it all before. The Kremlin triggers an escalation, then blames the West, but Moscow is the aggressor and there must be consequences. And I'm very glad to welcome Alexander Rahr. He's an author and analyst who also does political consulting for Russian firms, including Gazprom. He says the phone call between Presidents Biden and Putin helped to de-escalate the crisis and avoid a possible full-blown conflict. And joining us virtually from DW's Bonn bureau is my colleague Roman Goncharenko. He's an editor in our Russian department and was born in the Ukraine region of what was then the Soviet Union. He says Russia is using bullying tactics to press ahead with its creeping annexation of Donbass. Ukraine must stay calm. So let me begin by asking all three of you whether you think this is mostly just saber-rattling or indeed something more. And Gesine Dornblüth, your opening statement certainly suggests you see a very real danger of a Russian offensive.
Well, not necessarily. I think it's saber-wrestling and it's directed for impressing the West. It's a signal to the West and to President Zelensky from Ukraine. And I think Russia is trying to build up the stakes in order to have a better position for further, what is Verhandlungen for? Negotiations about the eastern Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
As a negotiating card. You also said in your opening statement that there must be consequences. But the Kremlin says, look, we have every right to move our forces within our own territory. These forces are still on Russian territory. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's not exactly true, because within the OSCE there are mechanisms and they oblige every participant and every member state to make transparent if you have such movements of troops, especially close to your neighbors' countries. So this is not true. And the consequences, I think the West should send a clear message, a very clear and united message towards Moscow, that Moscow is the aggressor and they stand in solidarity with Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Alexander Rahr, your opening statement referred to the call between Biden and Putin, in which Biden apparently offered to meet with Putin sometime in the next couple of months. So would you say this is mostly about testing the new U.S. president?
I think it's a sincere wish of Biden and probably and hopefully of Putin to meet together, look in each other into the eyes, tackle the problems and try to de-escalate, because also the Russian side fully understands that the key for some kind of stable relations between the West and Russia lies not in Brussels, not in Berlin, and not in Paris, but in Washington. And in order to negotiate on the future of European security architecture, on everything, you have to talk to the American president. And Biden also understands, and I think he has a lot of support of consultants who are telling him this: don't drive Russia into the arms of China. The main adversary of the United States is China, not Russia. And here Biden wants to tackle, of course, the problems with Putin, find out how far he can go in order indeed to de-escalate, or in turn to do then confrontation also with Russia.
I assume that you followed Russian media after this phone call. Some at least, suggested it was a real climb down by Biden. What makes you think that the call had a de-escalating effect for Moscow?
Well, one thing is what some kind of Moscow commentators report, but I'm pretty sure that in the Kremlin, of those people who are responsible for this decision taking in Russia, this statement of Biden that he wants to meet Putin has been welcomed. It makes Russia a more respective partner. It makes Russia look strong on the international agenda. It doesn't isolate Russia. The greatest fear of Russia is to be isolated, to be completely neglected, to be disrespected by the West. And here, by this suggestion of Biden to meet maybe in Geneva or in Vienna in the next weeks, I think it will happen, and Biden will meet the Russian leader before he meets European leaders in Paris, in Berlin, or in Brussels, is a sign which Russia cannot ignore.
And I want to come back to that a little bit later on, but let me go now to Roman Goncharenko. And your opening statement refers to the creeping annexation of the eastern Ukrainian region of Donbass. In fact, an all-out invasion is not generally Moscow's style. Until now, infiltration, hybrid warfare have been the preferred methods. So do you think that is changing? Would you expect to see a true military offensive here?
I would not exclude that, but I think it's about 80% or 70% muscle flexing and threatening Ukraine and the West, and about 20 or 30% maybe military escalation. I don't believe in a full-scale invasion, just like we saw in Crimea, for several reasons. I think a strategic aim of Putin and Russia is to weaken Ukraine, to prevent it from joining NATO and EU, probably to divide Ukraine into several states and to create new Ukraine, so to say, which would be Russia-friendly. This, I think that's a Russian strategy. But at the moment, on the tactical level, I think Russia is trying to negotiate with America, with the new administration of President Biden. And this is, I would say, a Russian-style invitation to a conversation. We should remember that just a few weeks ago, the new U.S. president, in a television interview said, yes, Putin is a killer. He didn't say the word killer himself, but he responded positively to a question. And this is something which irritates Vladimir Putin very much. And I think it played a certain role in the Kremlin's decision to escalate now. But the problem is much deeper, I think. There are several problems in eastern Ukraine which Putin doesn't like and wants Ukraine to move and to yield to Russian wishes. The West is not behaving like Russia would like it to. And maybe also Putin sees an opportunity in a general geopolitical constellation, because in the US we have a new administration which is not quite strong enough. We have in Germany Angela Merkel, the chancellor, who is going. Yeah, and it's not clear who will be after her. There is a pandemic in the world. The world is weakened by the pandemic. Ukraine is very weak. So this is just a chance. And Putin is known to be someone who uses the chances when they are there.
Thank you very much. And I want to come back to some of the points that you made. But first, let us take a closer look at what is going on in eastern Ukraine. Instability in the Donbass region actually goes back 7 years. Following the Russian annexation of Crimea, pro-Russian separatists in the eastern part of the country seized a large swathe of territory. Fighting there began escalating in February of this year. And for weeks now, Russia has been deploying additional troops to its side of the border.
According to the Ukrainian government, Russia has deployed up to 40,000 troops to the border with eastern Ukraine. Russian state television reports that this move is a response to provocations by Ukraine, while Russian military maneuvers on the Crimean Peninsula annexed by Russia continue. Both sides are playing with fire. Ukrainian President Zelensky wants to show strength as he visits his troops. What is clear to everyone is that if our soldiers are attacked, if there are casualties, then we have to fight back. This conjures up memories from 2014 when Russian soldiers were also stationed at the border, supporting pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine who sought independent status. 14,000 people died in the conflict, and there is a looming fear that this could happen again. A previously agreed peace deal has so far failed to be implemented. We are afraid for our children. I have another 5-year-old in kindergarten. How are they supposed to cope? We are afraid of every noise. If there is a loud noise somewhere, the children get scared and hide. Is a Russian attack on Ukraine imminent?
Gesine, let's drill a little bit deeper on what we can discern about Russia's strategy here. I actually have seen some commentators suggesting that an attack couldn't be imminent simply because the conditions on the ground would be so problematic at the moment in terms of weather and so on that troops would get bogged down.
Yeah, that's something I read too in April. It's not the best month, but you never know. I mean, nobody expected in 2014 that Russia would annexate Crimea and that it would send its troops and mercenaries to the Donbass. So you never know. I think about the motives, there might be one motive for a real invasion. This concerns Crimea and the water supply. So right now, the only contact or connection between the peninsula and Russia is a bridge, the new built bridge. And Crimea has a huge water supply problem. And maybe this is why Russia would like to have a land corridor to Crimea, but this is speculation, and indeed there are many other motives for just saber wrestling.
Indeed. So let's talk about some of those as well. Alexander Rahr, our report pointed out that Ukraine also has been deploying additional troops to the region. And in fact, President Zelensky rather ostentatiously took a CNN camera team with him to the front lines. Does Ukraine bear at least some responsibility for this escalation?
I think the same responsibility as Russia, because Ukraine is also building up its military presence at Donbass. And in my view, Zelensky thought that while ex-President Trump, who was not interested in Ukraine, he may now get more support, including weapon deliveries from the United States. He hopes that the United States will help him, maybe in a certain way, to get back Donbass and the Crimea. At least he sees his timetable and he wants to secure his interest, or Ukraine's interest in this manner. For Russia, the main motive of what they are doing is to prevent NATO expansion to Ukraine. And therefore, they want to keep Ukraine a split country. They want to threaten also the West that each step towards more membership of Ukraine in NATO will bring more confrontation of the West or NATO with Russia.
Sorry to react, if I may, because I think it's not acceptable to say that both Ukraine and Russia are in the same time responsible for this maybe new escalation, because President Zelensky said that, yes, we would like to defend, we will of course defend our land in case of an aggression. He did not say that he would try to get Crimea and the Donbass back by force. And on the other hand, you have these many thousands of troops on the Russian side, so you can't compare that.
Let me ask Roman Goncharenko to come in on this same point. Roman, you said in your opening statement you cautioned Ukraine to stay calm, but going to the front lines with a CNN camera team doesn't exactly fit that description, I would say. Do you see Ukraine as bearing at least some responsibility for provocation and escalation?
Well, I don't see any point in. I don't see any proof of Ukraine escalating, because you cannot compare the forces of Ukraine and Russia militarily and financially, and what we've seen so far in the years before and in the days and weeks before this escalation was the wish of the pro-Russian separatists, who are backed by Russia militarily, to start a fire, I would say. And by cautioning Ukraine, I mean Ukraine should be very careful not to create a situation like we had in Georgia in 2008, when we had some weeks of fighting in a region of South Ossetia, and then Georgia decided we will try to liberate, as they said, the President Saakashvili said, that region, and Russia, of course, was nearby, was ready in a standby modus, and then the invasion was legitimized, so to say. Yes, and this is what Russia maybe would like to see in Ukraine as well. Russia would like to see Ukraine make a mistake and maybe let itself be provoked by the fighting of the recent weeks. And this is probably the biggest danger and the biggest challenge for the Ukrainian government. But I don't see any proof or any evidence that Ukraine might do that, because if you take a CNN camera team with you, you're just trying to show to the world, you're trying to use the media. Ukrainian president is a media man. He's a media. He used to be a comedian. He used to be a television star. So that's what he does and what he can.
Yeah.
What he cannot do is to do anything militarily.
Gesine, let me ask you this. The fact is the conflict zone in eastern Ukraine is mainly Russian-speaking, and many of its residents now have Russian passports. Russia says that if these citizens are endangered, it must protect them. That is a rationale for military intervention that we have heard before. Is it justified?
No, it's not. But Russia did the preparations, and they have the laws that oblige them even to protect their citizens, even abroad. But the key question is whether there is the danger that they will be killed by nationalists or other people, so aggressive people. This is a narrative that Russia is spreading, that Moscow is spreading, by even comparing the situation in eastern Ukraine with the Srebrenica on the Balkans, which is disgusting from my point of view. So this is a strategy used by Moscow, and not only now in Donbass, but it has been used before in Georgia with Abkhazia and South Ossetia.
In February, Alexander, President Zelensky took measures to silence 3 pro-Russian broadcasters in Ukraine and also to sanction the oligarch who owns them. That oligarch happens to have close ties to Putin. Is the Russian troop buildup partly a message to Zelensky that he went too far in essentially trying to shut down Russian propaganda machines?
I think the message is more to the West. No NATO membership of Ukraine, as I said before. But indeed, I think it was a big mistake of Zelensky to close down the 3 television stations who broadcast in Russian, because still in eastern Ukraine, and more people live in eastern Ukraine than in western Ukraine, I mean, they tend to listen also to Russian programs, and that steers more tension inside the country than brings de-escalation. So I hope that this mistake somehow will be taken back. And what I think is tremendously important is that Putin and Zelensky meet, because in the Normandy format or in the Minsk format, these meetings with Germans and French, they didn't materialize. They didn't bring more progress for peace. So let's see how it will develop. Probably the United States will now enter the peace process in the Minsk process after the meeting between Biden and Putin. This will be a game changer. In which way it will be successful, that's a big question.
I want to come back.
I have to say a few words about those television channels. They were broadcasting in Ukrainian, those 3 channels, but they had links to Russia, that's for sure. And there are still other channels in Ukraine that broadcast in Russian language and mostly appeal to the Ukrainians in eastern and southern Ukraine, where people speak Russian still.
Thank you very much. And those formats that you mentioned, Normandy, Minsk, and so on, these are, of course, formats that try to bring other European powers as well into the conversation in hope of getting a real peace process going, but so far with notably limited results. So let's talk about the international aspect of this conflict, and briefly, if you would. In fact, Ukraine is literally caught between the fronts of old military blocs, the Western Defense Alliance, NATO, which Ukraine would like to join, and Russia.
Russian President Putin is celebrating the 7th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea, the strategically important peninsula located in the Black Sea. Despite the sanctions imposed by the West, Putin has not changed his policy. Russian soldiers are once again stationed on the Ukrainian border. And once again, they are waiting on help from the West, which was discussed at a NATO meeting for foreign ministers in Brussels.
We're now seeing the largest concentration of Russian forces on Ukraine's borders since 2014. That is of deep concern not only to Ukraine, but to the United States and indeed to many of our allies and partners.
The United States has actually sent warships to monitor the situation. Russia is responding with a military maneuver. What is the U.S. doing with its ships and soldiers who are constantly engaging in some kind of activity outside of NATO's borders in Ukraine, thousands of kilometers away from their own territory? This question has not been answered. It also raises the question, how far will NATO go to help Ukraine?
And let me put that question straight away to you, Gesine. The Russian buildup has provoked strong words from the U.S. and NATO, but would they follow up with action? Ukraine, of course, is not a member of NATO, so there is no treaty obligation there.
There is not, and if you mean by strong reaction, if Ukraine will be a member of NATO very soon, no, it won't. Of course, it will not, and it hasn't even been granted the membership action plan. But USA are talking about stronger sanctions, and this is something what might really happen, like cutting off Russia from the SWIFT system or
the banking international transfer system.
Something like that.
Roman, Chancellor Merkel has called on the EU to react to events in eastern Ukraine resolutely and unequivocally. Those were her words. How could the EU and NATO support Ukraine short of sending in troops? Should and could they send additional weapons? Should they, in fact, speed up the timetable for a Ukrainian membership in NATO? What do you think?
Well, at the moment, I think most things have been done. So there were strong words and weapons were sold to Ukraine in the past years. So I don't think Ukrainian army needs something which might change the situation on the ground. Of course, it would like to have Patriot systems, but I don't think the US will go that far because that will provoke Russia, of course. What might be needed if we see an escalation and a new military conflict, and which will lead to Ukraine losing more territory, then I think Europe and the West in general should think about strengthening or creating new sectoral sanctions against sectors of Russian economy, because this has shown, we have seen it in the past years, the strongest instrument to influence Russia. Not just visa and travel bans, but sectoral sanctions, but only if we see an escalation. At the moment, we are not there yet.
Let me stay with the question of sanctions and ask you, Alexander. The U.S. and the EU have actually enacted multiple rounds of sanctions against Russia in past years, not only for the actions in Crimea, but also for the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, the opposition politician, and also former spy Sergei Skripal. The U.S. is apparently about to impose new sanctions for cyber warfare and interference in the U.S. elections. So does any of these sanctions have any real influence on Moscow's behavior?
Not at all. And I think that we will have a completely different agenda. Russia and the EU will start cooperating on the vaccine Sputnik V for Europe. And I also think that for the Americans, the main adversary on the global stage is not Russia, but China. And therefore, Biden doesn't want to risk sending more troops to Ukraine or weapons to Ukraine and bind all his military apparatus and military machine in Europe, and neglect the situation which can tomorrow occur in China.
But clearly, Biden is willing to impose additional sanctions because it seems he's about to do so. Gesine, what do you think? How strong is the U.S. resolve to support Ukraine? We have heard that those warships that were supposedly going to be transferred, dispatched to the Black Sea, Turkey says that deployment has been canceled.
Yeah, exactly. But in fact, the U.S. never said that they openly that they sent it. So there's very much is unclear, and the only sources we used and were that the Turkish state said that there would come these warships. So I think it's a very clever reaction by Biden by offering a dialogue and at the same time giving clear advice that we will do something.
Mm-hmm. Roman, one sentence if you would. Is it time for Germany to finally put the Nord Stream gas pipeline project with Russia on ice?
I think this will be decided by the new German government in autumn after the parliamentary elections, and we should stop talking about it because it's not possible to do it at the moment.
Thank you very much to you for being with us from Bonn. Thanks to the others in the studio and to all of you out there. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.